good day, viewers. My name is Sidney Winston. I'm an atheist activist out of Vancouver, Canada. I have been bringing you stories of people who deconvert. I have many more to put into the record. But today I'm going to bring you, and you've heard the last video I did was a deconversion story by somebody whose YouTube channel is called the Raby Atheist. Now, that same person, he comes to the atheist community from a pretty unique position, and that is of a Christian educator. So what you're going to hear is, in my mind, a pretty tragic story, because by the end of it, you will understand that Christianity, and in this case it is Christianity because that's what he's specifically talking about, Christianity is child abuse. Christianity is for adults only, and children should not be exposed to it until they reach the age of rational thinking, till their teens probably. It's a pretty sad I think it's a pretty sad reflection on the world today, considering that we allow this type of stuff to happen under the noses of the federal government, and at the same time the federal government says, hey, you don't have to pay any taxes for all this abuse. Nah, you just go right ahead and enjoy yourself with our money. So it's quite clear to me that Christianity must, the idea that Christianity is compassionate must be crushed. There is no other way that I can think of. I'm sorry that it's such a bleak. I apologize. It's kind of a bleak future if we don't succeed. But let me introduce to Ed Raby. Here he is. You've no doubt recognized his face from last time. And he's got something to say.
All the details of what happened there.
Something's all right. Let's hit it.
Hello, I'm Ed Raby, otherwise known as the Rabbit Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues, and politics, theology, Bible, and anything else I can come up with in relationship to those issues. Today I want to do a little bit of a editorial kind of opinion piece, I suppose, but it's based on a couple of comments that I wanted to talk about basic, Christian education techniques that deal with how people are indoctrinated, or how people are, conditioned basically to accept the message of Christianity long term. And the thing about this is it goes back to a lot of church growth issues. When I was a Christian education pastor, a lot of this video is going to be based on my experience as a Christian education pastor. The main concern at my denomination back in the 90s was that we were shrinking. The Assemblies of God was hadn't really opened up a lot of new churches. They hadn't experienced a lot of growth in the United States. Around the world, yes, but in the United States, it had kind of stagnated. And so there was this idea of pressing forward the 90s as a decade of harvest. And I was somewhat of a beneficiary of that because I received a Decade of Harvest scholarship to go to Trinity Bible College. I also, went through a lot of things in that where there was a lot of emphasis on church planting and, once again, discipleship and things like that. And so at the time, as a believer, I really felt that this was, finally I was going to be part of something that was bigger than myself. As a young minister, it was definitely very exciting. And so that's kind of the way I was looking at things. But as I look back at it, I now realize that I had already been a victim of the process of indoctrination. And I was about to rinse, repeat with it. I was about to repeat it again to others because I was very excited about Christian education. I loved at the time studying the Bible as long as I edited it in my head, where I didn't look at the things that were obviously contradictory. I knew they existed, but I just kind of glossed over them. That's not the important part. And so when I finally got my first job in the ministry, I was a Christian education director as a layman, and then later on I got my license to preach, and that allowed me to use the title reverend and officially become a Christian education pastor, which was a position I held for a couple of years. And my job, working with the pastor I was working with, was to build the Christian education of that church. Now, I had a very driven, very vision-focused pastor, which, if you have a good vision in any organization and you really can communicate that vision well, you will have growth and you will have success for the most part. And we had a good tag team relationship. The pastor and I, that we worked together, he was a visionary. He said, this is what I need. He had the big picture. I was the engineer. I was the guy that made things happen. Okay, so he wanted a Sunday school that was growing. He wanted a Bible Institute that we could start, and then we could start licensing people to go out and do things in the community, and so on and so forth. So he gave me the tasks. I made them happen. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of what happened there, but I am going to go over some principles that I think are important in our Christian education. The one thing that we began to focus on is getting them as young as possible. This is the first principle of Christian education, is you have to get children. You have to focus on children. You have to have children's ministries. We had a children's church. We had a Sunday school that was very heavy-ended at the child end. We broke up the kids into grade groups, probably more so than anything else. Now, in order to accomplish that, you have to have teachers.
I think this is where we all prick up our ears and say, what did you just say? Did you just say that the number one, hold on. This is where you say, excuse me, Sydney, could you play that again? Because I'm not sure that I heard that correctly. And I'm going to say to you, absolutely. I'm not sure I heard it correctly myself. I'm just going to go back a wee bit. How about here?
Of what happened there. But I am going to go over some principles that I think are important in our Christian education. The one thing that we began to focus on is getting them as young as possible.
Okay, whoa, Ed. Getting them as young as possible. Is there any statement that you can come up with that sounds any more predatory? Getting them as young as possible. Now remember, this is the same gentleman that confessed essentially, hold on, there's something wrong here. They confessed essentially that Christianity is like providing a band-aid for people who you have cut. So you cut someone and you provide a band-aid and it fixes, makes it all better. Kissy better. This is important. I think this is actually the most important issue facing our culture. The instinctive jump to a conceived Christian culture, which nobody really knows what it is because no one practices it. Everybody's, Christian. Christianity doesn't succeed unless you sin. It's really not so well thought out at all. And I don't want to digress too much, but this is now where this gentleman Ed Raby is going to expose that child abuse is an essential tenet, a core value of Christian education. And this is I'm sorry that I have to subject you to this, but this is reality. This is the real world. This is Christianity at your door. Christianity with a big smile on its face, but really behind the smile, or the mask that is the smile, there is the Grim Reaper, the threat of hell. I mean, it's almost like hypnotism of the masses.
Education is you have to get children. You have to focus on children. You have to have children's ministries.
Wow.
We had a children's church. We had a Sunday school that was very heavy-ended at the child end. We broke up the kids into grade groups, probably more so than anything else. Now, in order to accomplish that, you have to have teachers and you have to have assistants. And so we had a system of having a teacher in the room with their assistant, especially for the little kids, because it just kept things going forward. Now, this is basic educational techniques, but in our case, we were using them for a very specific purpose. And I want to stress at this point that you don't have to have an abusive environment necessarily in Christianity, where you're scaring the kids all the time or beating them or whatever, like you hear some of the horror stories. I'm talking about the garden variety every Sunday school in most mainstream churches. And I'm going to tell you that it's an indoctrination tool because it comes off as very positive. And that's
correct. Listen, pay attention here. This is the reason that you are being yelled at by people like Darth Dawkins. So he throws you off. You're pretty much, you're calm, you're succinct, you're to the point. You know where you want to go with your defense, and then you get yelled at by these Christians, and they insult you and yell at you and demean you, degrade you. It's abuse. And this is where it starts, very, very young. Wow.
That's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to have a whole lot of negative. The reason we got them young is little children have one quality that you're counting on as a Christian educator, although you wouldn't put it this way because it sounds evil as shit. They're gullible. They will believe anything. Children believe anything because it's a survival trait. Because
Absolutely.
Kids who hear, hey, there's a tiger in that woods, get away, if they don't question that and just react, they have a higher chance of survival than the ones that, I don't believe you, okay, and walks right into the tiger. It's this dependency on adults that Christian education or any education really taps into, but the question is whether you're conscientious of that and, well, maybe I don't want to teach something that isn't really concretely known. In public education, you see a lot of kindergarten to third grade is teaching, basic language skills, basic math skills, teaching very verifiable facts. Okay. That's the reason for that. We don't want to deal with grays and ambiguities with kids, because then they'll take those as facts when they're really not facts. Okay, they're just opinions about the facts. We wait till later when they get older and they start to understand those nuances. That's not true in Christian education. We teach a lot of things that can't be verified. We get them while they're young. And the reason that is the younger we can get them, we learned that kids who grow up in the church, such as myself, have a tendency to stay longer in the faith than anybody else. And this is the real issue and the real problem with it. Because the reason we're getting them young is we're also teaching them a mythology and saying that it's fact. Okay? As adults, you can discover this mythology and you can discover that it is a mythology. But you get them while they're young, because they don't have any way of filtering that out. Their minds aren't developed enough to really question anything. Now, you will get your smart-ass kid every once in a while that challenges everything, and I have hope for humanity because of those smart-ass kids. But you can push them aside, or they can eventually not come to Sunday school, and the kids that are just eating everything up, you can stick with. You don't have to. In discipleship, we didn't really concentrate on the people that were being skeptical. We concentrated on the people that showed some sort of signs of believing. And in a real sense, that kind of, get them while they're young, get them when they're in a gullible or vulnerable state, is true of any church. That's why I say religion has an inherent sliminess, an oiliness to it, in my opinion. And so there's this idea of you only go after people that are responsive to your message. Now, that might be true of a lot of things, but in the case of religion, you're going after them with a message that you can't verify or prove, but you're going to treat it as if it can be verified and proven. And that's the real problem. The other principle that I used as a Christian education pastor was to make sure my teachers were editing the story for the age level. I'm going to use the example of Noah's Ark probably through the rest of this video. But the whole Noah's Ark story with Noah and animals and everything, it's amazing how this story evolves.
I just want to, I just want to say that, with what he's saying and with what he's just brought up here with the editing and the teachers and the assistants and whatnot, I just want to say this: these kids, they don't stand a chance. They are going to drink the Kool-Aid and all the way to the last drop. They're going to want more. They are going to come for a second helping of Kool-Aid because of this. This is mind control. These Sunday schools and Christian educational institutes are just centers of mind control. Like he says, get them when they're young. It's sick. It's fucking sick. And as sick as it is, the President of the United States right now, Joe Biden, is a proud Catholic of all things. And so is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, a Catholic. And they're proud to sit there in their government chairs and in the seat of the state. They are proudly promoting religion. There has to be a 180. Children should not be exposed to religion, and it should be mandatory.
On the age group that you're presenting it to, okay, and why you're presenting it to them in that way. When you're dealing with a beginner class of 3 and 4 year olds, you just put up the ark and you put, happy faced animals on the ark looking out the edge, and you do the traditional, children's look at Noah's ark. Noah's standing on there with a dove or something, and you don't talk about how the fact that God just literally committed genocide with the whole world. You talk about how Noah was a good guy. That's why God saved him. You talk about all the animals and how cute they are and whatever else. You edit the story's more, shall we say, evil parts out. Okay, you get rid of that. As the child gets older, you put a little bit more of that back, and you put a little bit more of that back, until finally when they're hitting the teen class, you just actually, by that time they can read often, and they can read the whole story for themselves. So you have to deal with the whole story, and you have to come up with better answers. But you edit the stuff out, because if you did that with kids, they might come to the conclusion that God is a really horrible person. And so if you proceed with the assumption that, hey, we can't have kids thinking bad things about God early on. We want them to think happy, loving things about God right away. That's what you do. And with my children's church, that was kind of the thing that I did too, because I wanted the children's church to reflect a much more positive attitude about Jesus and God. And we focused on the Jesus of love, and, that he cared about us, that he died for us, that he rose again for us. But we don't really dive deep into all the details until they get older and they can handle those. As children begin to learn how to read, their reading level often reflects what we will give them and what we will have them understand. And a lot of things are just crafts. We have kids do crafts that are fun. We have things, they color stuff, they make stuff. And it's all to give back to their parents. They see what we learned in Sunday school today. Now, how does this relate to church growth? In the case of church growth, what you're trying to do is get the children in, and then parents come along, okay? And then you have to have something for the adults, and you have discussion groups. You have a Sunday school class for them, maybe 2 or 3. In my case, by the time I was done, I had 3 different adult classes on 3 different subjects, and people could pick what they wanted to pick. And we had enough people to do that. So it was, and at that level, I don't need an assistant in the room. I just need an adult teacher. So 3 teachers handled that without a problem. And that's kind of, how it works. You add things. And in the adult classes, we were still editing, believe it or not, because what you're doing in adult classes is
Okay, I just want to make a point here that let me just cut in here. In terms of the length of this video, which is 24 minutes, it's now it's 12 and a half minutes into it, and he's been talking about the method, of the preferred method of getting the kids when they're young and indoctrinating them methodically until they can read and make sense of it for themselves, by which time it's too late because their minds are fucked. Right, so now he's going to, I believe, he's going to switch over to the adult education system. This is interesting because this is the kind of, I feel sorry for those Christians who come into these rooms and screaming and shouting after being indoctrinated as children, and essentially they're not making a point. They're just reacting. They're not reacting of reason or critical thinking. They're just reacting out of emotion. And there's not much we can really do with people like that until they themselves realize what they're doing. On the other hand, adults who come into Christianity, I think this is what he's going to talk about, and it might give us a better idea of what's behind the mask of these so-called Christians and perhaps how to deal with them better.
You're really trying to avoid the controversial passages. You teach the stuff that is positive and upbeat and everything else. Now, there is one exception to my positive rule, because you also edit for positive things, not just for grade level. But you edit for positive things, but there's one notable exception. Whenever we talked about judgment and hell, this is where a charge of Christian education being abusive has a little bit of weight, because you're literally scaring the shit out of kids. You're really, you're talking about, hey, you want to go to heaven where everything's nice and fluffy, and you get to laze around clouds, strum harps, and all that shit, and God's good, and we have all the good things, and we get to see all the people that aren't in part of our life anymore, and on the list goes. But you also have to talk about hell if you're that kind of church. Now, some churches talk about annihilation. Catholic Church will talk about purgatory, and things like that. And it's not a forever and ever thing. But evangelicals who have a real sola scripta point of view are going to sit there and talk about hell in the most concrete terms. It's funny how the doctrine of hell is very minimized until children hit teenage years. Then all of a sudden the rebelliousness of teenagers seems to bring out the hell doctrine, to remind them that, you don't want to be disobedient to the Ten Commandments, or you don't want to stop loving God or loving Jesus, because if you do, then you're going to go to hell. And then you start explaining how hell is a place of burning and death and destruction and, just constant misery forever and ever till the end of time. Nobody ever deals with the philosophical question of how the hell does that make God a good God? Nobody ever talks about that. It's funny how we edit for content all the way through, even when the people are adults, because even when we talk about hell here, we never, people would bring up, said philosophical objection, but I always taught my teachers to move on to the next thing, to get past that, just kind of address the question and, maybe say, hey, let's talk about it afterwards. What you don't want is the rest of the class to hear anything negative about your book called the Bible. You don't want to hear them, question whether or not the Bible is authentic. If you do, you say, well, we believe it is here, authentic here. I mean, you're free to believe what you want. And we're kind of counting on the fact that by doing that, that person either will stop showing up or whatever. What we wanted to focus on in Christian education is teaching what we wanted to teach. And this is where indoctrination and fear come in. Now, some churches push this even farther. They're very heavy-handed on this. And it's interesting that the fire and brimstone preaching starts usually when kids are hitting middle school. Because as they begin to think more abstractly, you have to keep them in line some way. Some churches go farther with real, true, what I would call emotional, physical abuse. And other churches just kind of stick with the hell doctrine or the annihilation concept. Or some churches I saw went really positive. They wouldn't even talk about hell. They would just constantly talk about, you don't want to miss out on heaven. You don't want to miss out on the good things of God. You don't want to miss out on the gifts of the Spirit. You don't want to miss out on God, working through your life, so on and so forth. There's a lot of ways to do this carrot and stick stuff. And it's not as simple in black and white, how abusive it is. I've been in churches where I thought they were very abusive as a Christian, and other ones I like, well, they kind of talk about hell, but it's almost a side note. The point is that Christian educators are editing. They're editing the Bible heavy. They don't want the content to go over people's heads.
Okay, what's happening?
So they justify dumbing it down and watering it down.
Okay.
At the same time, they don't want people to really engage the Bible critically. They want you to look at the Bible positively and in a positive aim. The one thing that you're taught over and over is if something contradicts the doctrinal statement, if something goes against what your church is teaching in the Bible, you avoid that path passage, or you talk about it very rarely. And you just keep moving on. And the reason you do this, okay, is because you don't want to get off message. You have to stay on message. You have to stay on the mission. You just have to stay on point. And that's what you have to do. And at that point, once an educated person gets to a certain point, the last principle of education is to continue to repeat the important truths that you want to emphasize. The one thing you teach with all this is when somebody opens their Bible and they begin to read it, they learn to see things with certain things. Like, God is always loving, so even when I read a passage where God is doing something stupid, he must have been, or evil for that matter, he must have had a good reason. You begin to reinforce this from the time they're kids all the way through. Now, the reason Christian education became so important to the church, and still is a hot issue, is because churches are shrinking. And the only way to keep long-term people, the people that you see that are usually the most gung-ho about it, gung-ho about their faith, is kids, people that have grown up in the church, or they've had a religious experience that's brought them into church and they can't deny their experience. Those are the two things that'll give you a zealot, okay? That'll give you somebody that's right in your face. Now, Christianity is a lot more subtle. Other religions are much more in your face. But in my case, my whole point was to edit the content for both. We don't want to give them stuff they can't understand, and we want to always present things, from a PR standpoint in a positive vein. We wanted to make sure that if we did have a negative idea to talk about, we wanted to sit there and say, hey, you want to avoid hell, go to heaven. Heaven's a better place. This is why you want to do all this stuff. We wanted to get them young and keep them long term with a good discipleship program that worked until they were adults. Steer away from controversial topics. Make sure you focus on your message. Stay on point. And stay away from anything that's controversial. And that's how you keep people in the church. It's the best way to do it. And good preachers and good Christian education people know how to do this, and they can do it with a smile and a hug. Indoctrination doesn't have to be inherently abusive in a lot of other ways, other than maybe the teaching of the doctrine of hell, if that's what the theology is, and using it as a fear tactic to keep people in line. But outside of that, you can just cause people to start, when they read their Bible, if they read it at all. The funny thing is, we always encouraged people to read the Bible for themselves, but I'm not really sure we meant it. And we also knew that they wouldn't do it. Most people come to church and they want the preacher to tell them what to believe. They want the teacher to tell them what to believe. I knew in my last church, people hardly cracked open their Bible. They made me do it for them. And that's kind of the understanding that you need to understand. I ran into atheists that knew their Bible better when I was a preacher than most of the people in my congregation. And that was a testimony to the fact that the indoctrination worked. If you begin to trust the authority of the teacher and you're never allowed to challenge it, which is most Christian education, if you trust the authority of the Bible and never challenge it, and you're taught that that's what you do, you never challenge the Word of God because it's the Word of God. If it says something, it must be true. Then in those contexts, it gets very, very hard to not indoctrinate somebody. It gets very difficult for people to really challenge their beliefs because they build a level of trust with you because you've had them since you're a kid. You've made sure that the content that they have received has either been in bite-sized chunks so that they can understand it, but also that you've made sure to keep it positive, to always present God in a positive light, even when he does shitty things in the Bible. So when they read that passage where he asks, the people to commit genocide, well, he must have had a good reason. And that idea of God is good all the time, God is good all the time, God is good, begins to reinforce anything you do in real religion, that where God is presented, it must have been a good reason. He must have had a good reason to do it. And slowly but surely you build these certain attitudes. My main focus was to build certain attitudes in Christianity, in my Christian education programs, because I wanted people to develop a positive outlook about the Bible and God. And when you do that, you can very much succeed. And people who grow up in the church are some of the hardest people to deconvert, me being a very good example. To get them to see that their religion is no better or worse than any other religion is one of the most difficult things to do in the United States with regards to Christianity. People have been taught the Christian faith since they were little. You have some of the most weird, evil people thinking they're Christians and going to heaven because of how effective the indoctrination can be. As the biggest enemy, of course, to this is the internet. And the more information that gets out there to people, teenagers now, they can pick up their phone and Google anything, and they will find counter arguments to everything their Sunday school teacher is doing. And that is why Christianity is losing. It's the information. It's becoming harder and harder in the Western world to channel information, to present things always in a positive light, to not have other arguments, and to not have people like me that have deconverted and said, hey, this is all bullshit. I just want to thank everybody for stopping by. I hope this little discussion has kind of given you a glimpse into the world of Christian education, at least from my perspective. I can only speak for myself on how I did it, but these are some of the observations I now look at when I look at it looking in retrospect. And so thanks for sticking by and stopping by and giving a listen. And, I just appreciate all of you doing your liking and sharing and subscribing. It's really grown the channel, and I appreciate all of you doing that. And, you can also follow me on Facebook. It's a good way to get the videos and some other information about the channel at various times. So thank you once again for doing that as well. And hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Raby, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.
That was great. Wasn't it? Wow. I hope. May I ask you all to share this? This has been an eye opener. The more people that get to watch this. Actually, there's a chat happening. Let me bring all the chatterers in. Ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-da. All right, so let me have a look out for number one. Hey, he was here long ago. Well, look out for number one. Thank you for trying. Hope you catch up with us later on. God equals the square root of -1. You've been around for, I think, the whole broadcast. The African Humanist. Hello, Esther. How you doing? Congratulations on kicking the Germans' asses yesterday. I loved every second of it. Oh, I loved it. Okay. Fucking hell. Religion poisons everything. That's worth repeating. Religion poisons everything. Christopher Hitchens said that. So, yeah, I understand that everybody's working, got things to do. It's just, honestly, it's not even 8:30 in the morning where I am. The reason I did this broadcast so early now is because of the heat wave we've been suffering under. Today, it's only 20 degrees Celsius right now at 8:30 in the morning. Yesterday, by this time, it was 5 or 6 degrees warmer. So it might be a reprieve of some sort in terms of the weather today. But it was so uncomfortable yesterday that going online last night just seemed to be honestly the last thing I wanted. It was close. The humidity was clammy, and it was just bleh. I mean, one of the reasons I came to Canada, I guess, subliminally maybe, was because, the global consensus is that Canada's cold, right? I mean, everybody I spoke to before I came to Canada said, "Ooh, you're going to Canada? I don't know if you're going to get used to the cold there. It's really cold." I mean, literally everybody that I spoke to before I came to this place told me that, because that's what they'd heard. They all think Montreal or Toronto or whatever. That's what Canada, especially back in the old days. So that is why I broadcast this early. Jesus is Lord. Would you like to come into a conversation? I don't know what we're going to talk about, because our axioms don't agree. So it's probably not a good idea, is it? So we got Quasar and Jesus is Lord in the chat. Welcome, people. Welcome to my space. So Jesus is Lord. What do you think of indoctrinating children with Christianity and the methods used there to accomplish that end? Maybe we could talk about it later on. Maybe I'll open up a conversation room. I don't know when though. I'll have to tell you what I'll do. Okay, this is it. Executive decision. I'm going to end this live stream. I'm going to check the comments regarding any thoughts or your thoughts on having a live conversation room, and I will anyway, probably, depending on the comments, depending on how hot it gets in the next, 30 minutes, maybe I'll open a conversation room soon. Okay? So, based solely on, popularity. If you guys want it, you will get it. That's essentially the best I can offer you. You want it? You want a conversation room? I'll give you a conversation room. It just won't be, right now. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a great day. See you in 20 minutes. Right now. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a great day. See you in 20 minutes.